jump right in and have our next guest join us. Let me admit him in.
Yep. Come on down. You're the next contestant on the launch party. Woohoo!
Yes. We've got that theme going.
It's like I'm now Vanna White. Woo! With my little bow in my hair.
Yes.
Although it kind of looks like it's slipping to the side there.
That's okay.
That's okay. It works for me too.
You can kind of wear it
any direction.
Yeah.
It
absolutely.
works.
All right.
We're waiting for Chris to connect. I think he's here.
It's being a little bit slow.
Telling you, technology is after us.
Yes.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, Chris.
I can see and hear you. Bye.
Hey, and I'm going to read just a little bio about you to introduce you. And so we welcome Chris Semtner. He is an internationally exhibited fine artist whose paintings have entered numerous public collections, including the Virginia Historical Society and the University of Maryland. Semtner has written several books and chapters on topics including literature, visual art, and history, in addition to contributing articles to biography.com, Resources for American Literary Studies, Crime Writers Chronicle, and the Edgar Allan Poe Review. He has curated critically acclaimed exhibits for museums and galleries across the country with his Library of Virginia exhibit, Poe, Man, Myth, or Monster, earning the praise of the New York Times. His exhibits for the Poe Museum brought that institution awards and honors from Time Magazine, USA Today, and several others. In search of innovative ways to bring Poe to new audiences, Semtner has collaborated on Poe-themed performances with groups including the Latin Ballet of Virginia, the Friends of Shockoe Hill Cemetery, and Engaging History Productions. Semtner has appeared on BBC4, PBS, Travel Channel, Military History, NPR, CNN, and other networks. He regularly speaks about a variety of unusual, obscure, and macabre subjects to groups of all ages around the country and as far away as Japan. His most recent book, The Poe Shrine, Building the World's Finest Edgar Allan Poe Collection, tells the strange but true stories behind the Poe Museum's artifacts.
Yay!
We welcome you to the launch party.
Hey, good to be here.
Yes, thank you.
Let's party like it's 1849.
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
Woo, woo.
So, Chris, do you want to just talk a little bit first kind of about maybe some of the things that are going on with you at the Poe Museum or anything like that before we show your Curator's Crypt video?
Okay, well, the Poe Museum is down here in Richmond, Virginia. This is where Poe grew up. So we have a lot of artifacts related to his life here. He lived here at very pivotal points, his childhood, his beginning in journalism, his marriage, and then he came back at the end of his life. So we have things from his childhood bed all the way up until a lock of his hair cut from his head at the time of his death, a piece of his coffin, with a place to go for all things Poe. And we've been collecting for 101 years, getting all the best pieces. One of my favorites is the engagement ring that Poe gave to Elmira Shelton just before he died, with his name engraved on the inside of the band. It's just great to be here. It's the closest thing you get to seeing Poe in the flesh, is coming down here to the museum and being close to the things that he owned, that he used. You get to see the chair where he slept. And as I mentioned, that bed where he had the nightmares that might just have inspired some of his terror tales.
Absolutely.
And this month is our Christmas time. So we're packed. We have school groups coming pretty much every day. So we're terrifying kids over and over again. And a big part of it's the Telltale Heart, that we're doing off-site programs. Again, I think I'll be doing the Telltale Heart at the Bird Park Pump House the 28th of October. It's an abandoned 1880s Gothic revival pump house made of old rough granite. And it hasn't been really used for decades. So they decided, well, let's have a tour of the pump house, and then they get to go upstairs and meet Edgar Allan Poe himself, and he'll perform the Telltale Heart, the Cask of Amontillado, and some other works. But there's things going on all month long, including this weekend we're going to Baltimore for Poe Fest. So we'll have a Poe Museum tent up there, and you can come and maybe see a little bit of what we do, learn a little bit more about what we're doing. But definitely check the poemuseum.org to see all the events we're doing throughout the month. We're bringing back again, our October on happy hour. It's kind of like a happy hour, but at the Poe Museum, so it's good and miserable. It's a
Yeah.
horrible time,
Woohoo!
6 to 9.
My
Last
kind of
month
party.
the theme was the Poe Downs, so we had bales of hay out there, country
Cool.
music. But this month it'll be our annual Halloween on happy hour. So there'll be the costume contest, fun, games, tricks and treats. So you don't want to
Nice.
miss that. And then after that, we'll be gearing up for our Poe birthday bash in January. So you'll hear more about that. Just keep visiting poemuseum.org and our Facebook and Instagram. And even our cats, Edgar and Pluto, have their own Instagram page. So I want to be sure to follow Edgar and Pluto and see what sort of mischief they're up to.
Hmm.
And boy, howdy, can cats get up to a lot of mischief.
Yes, they definitely can.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
And I was going to say, you guys do a cat calendar with Edgar and Pluto.
Yes.
We get that every year, and my cat Poe loves to get, like, when I get it, I show him the pictures, and he actually does look at it, and he loves you, Chris, watching. Like, he will hear your voice when I am playing Curator's Crypt, and he will come up and watch you. He he enjoys it.
Oh, it's because I play a string during the
You
video.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, he loves it. But yes, I've been to the museum a few times. It's been a while since I've gotten to go, but it is definitely worth the visit. Probably one of my favorite artifacts you guys have is his vest. It's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, yeah, we love that piece. It really gives people a sense this is where this guy was standing. It's just the scale of you're really standing face to face with him. And right next to the vest, we have Poe's socks. So I think that's a great combination to show the kids who visit to say,
Mhm.
you know, this is a guy just like you, that he had dirty, smelly socks, just like all of you. He walked these same dirty, smelly streets, but what separated him is this imagination. You guys, you kids right now visiting, have that same power. You have the power of imagination. Who knows where you can go from here? You can go into science or technology, literature, film, visual art, but you just have to follow that imagination. That's what really drives you forward. And also a lot of
Absolutely.
hard work. Guess what we
Yes.
say,
Yes.
1% inspiration, 99%
Good
perspiration.
perspiration.
Yes.
And we can never forget that Poe put in a lot of hard work. You can see it when you look at those manuscripts and realize this guy's writing everything by hand, meticulously. He's editing one magazine and writing short stories and articles for it and writing short stories for another magazine. He's constantly busy. And that's another part that set Poe apart from others is constant working from morning through the night and never giving up on his dreams.
Absolutely. And talking about writing it by hand, his penmanship was just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Oh yeah, just really precise. We've got a lot of the fair copies that he turned into the magazines, and just, a lot of the handwriting back then is chicken scratch.
Mhm.
Yes.
Even back then they had penmanship classes. People knew how they should write, they just didn't do it. It
Yeah.
looks like they're holding the pen with their feet or something. But
Yeah.
with Poe, you can still read it. And
Mhm.
it's great, especially some of the things he printed. Instead of just using cursive, some of the manuscripts he printed,
Mhm.
and it almost looks like it's typed. But then you realize he didn't have a typewriter. They didn't exist yet. But
Yeah.
here he is
Yeah.
with this immaculate handwriting.
That's one of the things about the penmanship from those days, where it was, whether it be cursive or whether it be printed, you couldn't really tell some of the difference unless you really knew what you were looking for,
Mhm.
because of just the sloping and the calligraphy type
Yeah.
of the artwork of writing. And one of the things that I want to bring attention is most people forget that Poe, if they're not real Poe fanatics,
Right.
forget that Poe was a Richmond boy and a Baltimore, and he was born in Boston.
Mhm.
So he was, kind of got the B's, the Baltimore and the Boston, but Richmond can't be forgotten.
No, not at all. It's a
So,
huge part of his life.
exactly. So, but yeah.
Yeah, he did get around quite a bit. He was
Mhm.
moving. He had to go where the magazine work was. That meant going to
Absolutely.
New York for a year, then bouncing back to Philadelphia for 6 years, then back to New York. And then
Mhm.
he had to think about his wife's health. So he moved to the Bronx
Mhm.
because that was the countryside back then. He moved there to get fresh air. So he was moving around a lot. So there's just not one town that has all the claim to Poe, because he was always a part of the world. He considered himself a citizen of the universe. So he was bigger than just Virginia or Maryland. He was the whole universe. He understood that we all fit into a greater scheme. There's a whole book he wrote about called Eureka. You got to check that one out, where
Oh, yes.
he explained how everything, the whole universe was once one and will be one again. And this was wild talk for 1848. People thought,
Absolutely.
"What's wrong with this guy?"
I've read it when we did, I think, our first episode on science and science fiction.
Yes.
I read Eureka, and I was blown away at just how detailed it was with his scientific theories and just very deep thinking. Just really.
He was ahead of his time. But he kind of fit with some of the Reformation and some of the Enlightenment that was going on at the time of his growing up. So I think that helped, with the science and with the religion and with all the rest of it happening education wise. And he did travel a lot. But what I like is he paid homage not only just to America, but like, Chris said, he viewed the universe as his playground, basically.
Yeah.
So that include anything. When he wrote so much with French in mind, and you're like, dude, are you French? But, because you got Auguste Dupin, he's a Frenchman, and you're going, but you've never been to France.
Yeah,
So,
but he knew French. So.
yeah, so it's very interesting.
What's great about that book, Eureka, that last book he did, his magnum opus, is at the end, those last few pages where he talks about how we're all one, that the universe expanded from one dense particle that was actually so dense that it wasn't even a particle anymore, because there was no force of attraction or repulsion. The particles within it were so close they merged into one, so the whole universe just collapsed in on itself, and the whole universe just sprang out of nothing and would contract back into nothing. And he's talking about, well, if it contracts back into nothing, where's it go? And then another universe pops out, and he describes how, as children, we have memories of those different universes that we lived in previous lives. And he describes this, the universe coming into existence, expanding, contracting, as the heartbeat of God. And we're here to talk about the telltale heart. So that's perfect. The whole universe is just a big heartbeat of God.
Yes.
And what he describes universe as a poem. And he's a poet. So the highest compliment you can give somebody is to call them a poet. And for him, the highest compliment he can give to the universe is to call it a poem.
Yeah, and that's a really cool way to think of it. Absolutely. Well, since we've kind of weaved our way around to the Telltale Heart.
Yes.
So, Chris, would you like to introduce your Curator's Crypt video that we're about to show before we show it?
All right. Well, this is a little video we put together for the Poe Museum's YouTube page. We started doing it during the pandemic because we were closed. So it was just, most days, just me and the cats. And Edgar and Pluto helped with the camera work and the editing. And so this particular one is about a piece we got for the museum's collection. We just got it donated a couple years ago. We unveiled it last year for the museum centennial, and we really love it. It's the pocket watch that was ticking away in Poe's pocket when he wrote The Telltale Heart.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
Yeah, very poignant.
Yes,
I like it.
Absolutely. Okay,
right,
well,
so here we go.
Let's go.
Unless we show the wrong video, then it's something else.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll figure it out then.
All right, let me share my screen. And here we go.
Technology is slow as me today. But okay.
There we go. This.
Telltale watch.
There's one simple vision hack anyone can use to improve vision, so you can say goodbye to your optometrist for good. Did you know that?
All right, here we go.
Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. I'm searching underneath the floorboards for the source of a most troublesome sound. Perhaps you've heard it. It's a low, dull, quick sound, almost like that made by a watch when enveloped in cotton. It's the beating of the old man's heart. Oh, never mind. I found it. Well, if you'd like to join me in my search for the origins of Poe's classic terror tale, The Telltale Heart, why don't you join me down here in tonight's installment of The Curator's Crypt. This is Edgar Allan Poe's boyhood bed from the Poe Museum. One of his classmates and lifelong friends, John Hamilton Mackenzie, said that one of Poe's greatest fears growing up was that when he was lying asleep in this bed, he imagined that someone out there, somewhere in the shadows, was watching him as he slept, that he would open his eyes to see a face staring back at him from the darkness. Decades later, those early childhood fears formed the basis of his classic terror tale, The Telltale Heart, the story of a little old man alone in bed at night who was being stalked by a killer. It's also the story of that murderer who assures us that he's not mad, that what you mistake for madness is merely an over-acuteness of the senses. As he says, the disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled. Above all things was the sense of hearing acute. Oh, I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. Most of Poe's story takes place in total darkness, where the narrator, the murderer, hears strange sounds that are eerily reminiscent of the beating of a human heart. For instance, he describes listening to the death watches in the walls, tiny beetles that make a ticking sound, kind of like this. Then he describes hearing another sound, a low, dull, quick sound, almost like that made by a watch when enveloped in cotton. Maybe even this one. This is the watch that was in Edgar Allan Poe's pocket while he wrote The Telltale Heart. Maybe even wrapped it up in cotton to hear how it sounded, or placed it in front of him on his writing desk for inspiration. Now, the murderer in the story believes that slight ticking sound is the beating of the old man's heart that he hears all the way across the room. And this murderer, after all, has supersonic hearing. He can hear all things in the heavens and in the earth. So why not the old man's heart? So this watch bore witness to the creation of one of the greatest horror stories of all time. Poe probably bought it in 1841 or 1842 during a brief period of prosperity while he's employed at Graham's Magazine in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, he left the magazine in April of 1842 because he wanted to start his own magazine, which didn't work. And you pile on top of that the fact that his wife came down with tuberculosis. He was struggling to make a living. Almost even considered giving up journalism altogether to find a cushy job in Washington, D.C. Can you imagine Poe becoming a Washington bureaucrat or maybe even a politician? By November of that year, he was on the verge of declaring bankruptcy when he sat down to work on this story. There's a few inspirations that probably came to mind. One was a murder trial he covered for Alexander's Weekly Messenger. A man named James Wood had remorselessly murdered his entire family, and now he was claiming in court that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. In addition to this, Poe is also fascinated with another story you might have heard. from Salem, Massachusetts in 1830. A man named Richard Crownshield Jr. robbed and killed a little old man named Joseph White in his bed in the middle of the night and slipped out through the window. Poe might have heard of this case because Daniel Webster wrote about it. And he described how the murderer, after the deed was done, checked carefully the pulse of his victim. Then he ducked out the window, leaving not a trace of his presence there. Probably assured that he would never get caught, that his secret would follow him to the grave. But as Webster wrote, the secret which the murderer possesses soon comes to possess him. And like the evil spirits of which we read, it overcomes him and leads him whithersoever it will. He feels it beating at his heart, rising to his throat and demanding disclosure. He thinks the whole world sees it in his face, reads it in his eyes, and almost hears its workings in the very silence of his thoughts. It has become his master. It must be confessed. It will be confessed. Does that sound familiar to you? The murderer in Poe's story kills the old man, carefully dismembers the body, placing the pieces under the floorboard so carefully that no human eye could detect anything wrong. He thinks he's gotten away with his crime. Even after police who've been dispatched because a neighbor heard the old man scream in the night searched the house, he feels assured that he's gotten away with it. He shows them the old man's treasures undisturbed. He says that the scream had been his own after a nightmare. He tells them the old man, he's on vacation. And he would have gotten away with it until he started hearing that low, dull, quick sound. That ticking, almost like the sound of a watch when enveloped in cotton, which he is convinced is the beating of the old man's heart even after death from beneath the floorboards. Well, was it the old man's heart? Or the killer's guilty conscience? Or maybe the beating of Poe's watch? Poe submitted the Telltale Heart to the Boston Miscellany, which promptly rejected it. They said it was too loud. So his friend James Russell Lowell agreed to publish it for $10 in his new magazine, The Pioneer, right here. Unfortunately, $10 was not enough to pay off all of Poe's debts. So just before the publication of what would become one of his most famous stories, he filed for bankruptcy. And right at the top of the list of his creditors is John Albright of Philadelphia, a tailor who Poe owed $180. A lot of money back then. Poe had no chance of paying it off with the $10 he got for the story, so he gave him this watch, which at the time would have been worth about $100 to $150. It's a fine gold piece made in France. And if you look on the inside here, right there, Poe's name is engraved right on the inside. The watch's ownership descended through several different members of the Albright family before going into the collection of a rare watch collector. In the 1930s, the owner at the time actually tried to sell it to the Poe Museum. Of course, the Poe Museum couldn't begin to afford it because it was the Great Depression, after all. It went through several more owners over the years, making the news occasionally from time to time because it was Edgar Allan Poe's watch. Until finally, Susan Jaffe Teen bought it at auction. And she decided to donate it to the Poe Museum in honor of the museum's centennial this year. And it'll go on display on April 28th of 2022 for the very first time. Maybe if you're here, if you listen very carefully, you can even hear it ticking. Or maybe that's just the beating of the old man's heart. Thanks for joining us. And if you'd like to see more videos like this before anyone else has a chance to see them, why not support the Poe Museum by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Poe Museum. Until next time, I leave you with more gratuitous footage of the Poe Museum cats.
Exactly. Nice, nice.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes, Chris, thank you for sharing that video for everybody to see. So I love just all the things about the watch and, just thinking about Poe writing it and all of the things. So it's really cool.
I love that watch. It's a nice addition to the collection, and that bed is, kids really relate to the bed when they see it. Of course, adults relate to the bed because most of us sleep in a bed similar to that, a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
And when the kids look at it, we say, well, is that like your bed? How's that different? How's the same? And they can sort of relate. They start to see Poe as a kid who grew up right here and went through a lot of the same problems that they didn't get along with his foster father, just like a lot of them don't get along with their parents. Got into trouble, just like a lot of them get into trouble. Swam in the James River, just like kids still swim the James River today.
Yeah, that's really neat. I think, Jeanie, did you have a question?
No, I was just thinking about the watch because a lot of the older generation, I don't think anyone, unless they've watched The Big Bang Theory and see Sheldon's love of pocket watches, have ever actually seen a pocket watch in real life or heard one, and don't understand that ticking, whether it be from a grandfather clock or from an old pocket watch that a man would carry around, you don't really understand that, that ticking can just be, it can be a part of you. If you wear the watch long enough, it feels like it syncs with your heart. So it is like a heartbeat because it's time, it's ticking away your time of life.
Yeah, that's true.
So I can see Poe using that and using that sound and everything to help himself with his writing. Because it would fit right up his alley of horror, and that would be something I would do. So
yeah.
Definitely sounds are a big part of that, and how the sounds envelop us, because as I mentioned in the video, a lot of the story takes place in total darkness. That's one of the great things about it. It's a dark room. There's one lantern. The lantern's closed with no light showing out, and the murderer is gradually opening the door, so proud of what he's done for 7 long nights. He's done the same thing. 7 long nights the old man's been sleeping. So he could not commit the deed, for it's not the old man that vexed me, but his vulture eye.
Right.
So that night he almost chuckles to himself. So proud he is that the man starts up in bed, and you can just imagine total silence, just the rustling of the sheets on that bed. It's like a car crash.
Absolutely.
And you'd think that the murderer would withdraw, but no. He couldn't see me for fear of all the shutters drawn for fear of robbers. So I continued to thrust my head within the room, and just imagine this. It took him a full hour to get himself entirely in the room. There's another scene where he's startled the old man and he sits perfectly still for a full hour. Imagine standing there, complete darkness for a full hour. Your imagination's got to run wild. And he describes the sounds around. There's the death watch beetles on the wall. He says, the victim says, it's just the wind in the chimney, just a cricket that made a single chirp, just a mouse. You start to hear these sounds, even when there's nothing really to see. He couldn't see anything. And when he does finally open the lens of the lantern, a thin beam of light like a spider's web falls in the old man's eye, and that's all you see, this old blue eye like a vulture's. I don't know any blue-eyed vultures, but
Yeah.
all you see, he saw nothing of his face or his body, just that eye, as if by
Yeah.
instinct it landed on that eye. So it's a great visual here. You just have one little speck of light, and it's just that strange pale blue eye.
Oh
I
my
think that's
God.
what really makes this story really effective. It reminds me of a line from The Raven. Do you remember that one? Deep into that darkness peering, long I
Yes.
stood there, wondering,
Yeah.
fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before.
Yep.
Yeah.
Imagine that your imagination really is just going wild, dreaming dreams no more ever dare to dream.
Yeah, and I love too that many of Poe's stories, and this one in particular, Follow the House of Usher as well, just that acuteness of sound and how important it was in some of his stories and how much it played a part in the
Yeah.
plot and
The bated breath,
Yeah.
the suspense that he was very, very
Building,
good
yes.
at building, because he was playing upon not only his own world, but he was playing upon everybody else as the reader and what we experience. Like you're
Mhm.
talking about in the nighttime, we say we like try to picture what those sounds are that wake us up, and we're going,
Right.
okay, wait a minute, no, that was just a mouse. No, that was just a tree rubbing against the window, because we're trying to calm ourselves down, because in the dark, you can't see what's truly there.
and you hope it's not horrific.
Yeah. But you know in your mind that during the day when the lights are on, you know what's there.
Mhm.
So why should you be afraid of when there's no light?
Yeah,
Because you don't know what's really there.
right.
That could be hiding in the shadows, could be hiding in the dark.
Mhm.
And that sound,
Exasperates.
exactly.
Mhm.
It
It's great how
exaggerates.
it starts building, doesn't it? The heartbeat grew louder and louder and louder. And this whole
Yes.
time, imagine you're trying to hold this lantern still so that the beam falls in that little try. So all the tension in your muscles just trying to hold that lantern still. You imagine the story is almost like a rubber band where you're pulling it, stretching it, stretching it, stretching. How long can you stretch it before it snaps? How far back do you pull back that mousetrap before it snaps?
Mhm.
And we know he does snap, and he just
Yes.
kills the old man. And then you have another moment when the police show up, and again you get that tension building.
Mhm.
You start to hear that sound again, and it's just a ringing in my ears. But then he starts to realize the sound was not within my ears. He starts to realize it's coming from down there. And
Mhm.
it's a great way he plays with us. So that story's so well designed, like really, I
It
keep saying like
is.
a mousetrap, because it is designed to hit you at just the right point. And you're lucky if you can escape it in one piece. The old man doesn't. He
No,
doesn't get out of there alone.
No, in
unfortunately.
pieces. But another thing is that you could play upon that the old man had a pocket watch, and that even during the dismantling, during the nighttime when they got, when he was killed, that the pocket watch got buried with him. And that was part of,
Interesting. Yeah.
part of what he was hearing is like, it could be the pocket watch. So it may not all be in his mind. It could actually really be something. And it's just, developed into something like a heartbeat for him.
Mhm.
Yeah, because he could easily think that the pocket watch is beating faster and faster. There's a lot of
Mhm.
teachers who come here who said that they taught their students this story, or that years ago their teacher
Mhm.
taught this story while playing a metronome. Imagine the metronome going back.
Yes. Yes.
And the students, when they read the story, actually believe the metronome's speeding up and getting louder and louder. So imagine that murderer. He could have really believed that ticking watch was getting louder and louder and louder.
Mhm.
He thought his head
As
would
his guilt
burst.
rises and rises.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As his guilt
absolutely.
was building and building in
Yeah.
his mind. And, it wasn't just trying to get rid of that eye, that all encompassing, that was the
Mhm.
evil that he was trying to get rid of. He got rid of an actual person instead of
Yes.
just the eye. And it's like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
I took a life. I took someone from this plane, and
Mhm.
the guilt inside where,
Yeah.
if you have a conscience anyway.
Yeah, adding the metronome to as you're reading it, like in a
Mhm.
classroom. I teach freshman English. We don't get to read Telltale Heart. They've usually already read it in middle school, but they all know it because that's the one thing. Whenever I bring up, we're going to start talking about Poe. Oh, Telltale Heart,
Mhm.
and that would be a fantastic way to read the story, having that ticking, or that noise.
Or you can go to the science teachers, and they've got one of our friends who teaches science, the ball, like
yeah.
the string of the metal ball, and you pull one end, pull
Yeah.
the other, and it just keeps blocking.
Yeah.
And then they keep building as one, it starts off really loud, and then they just slowly until it finally just dies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that actually would work very well too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Tales Torn from the Heart with Sarah Krokel's next
Yes.
book kind of would be very perfect. You could, hey, read it with the metronome playing. Let's see how that works.
Yes.
Be cool.
Absolutely. And you're going to be writing the foreword, she
Yeah.
told us.
Yes.
So that'll be wonderful.
And you wrote the foreword for the second one, correct?
No, I wrote a forward for the second of the Dwight McPherson's
Oh,
Okay. Okay.
the Imaginary Voyages of Edgar Allan Poe.
yes. Okay.
Okay.
I knew you also had done a foreword for someone else, but I couldn't remember if it was the second one of
Yeah.
hers or if it was someone else.
Yeah.
And forward is just a way to sort of set up the rest of the stories, give a little introduction, a little bit of background on the Telltale Heart and just why it works. I didn't want to just give the publication history or just
Mhm.
the facts about that, but just what's it like to inhabit these characters.
Mhm.
And certain people have. I've performed it countless times for school groups, but so I have different actors. They performed it on stage or in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Visual artists have illustrated it. Filmmakers like Poe Movies just did a film version of it last year, and
We just showed it a couple hours ago on here. So
so people have really inhabited that story. So you come up with different perspectives from the different people inhabited it. I know one guy who used to work here. He had a part-time job working at the medical school near here, and what he did was, since he was an actor, he was given prompts to portray people suffering from different mental illnesses.
Okay.
So when he performed the Telltale Heart, he was trying to be a rigorously accurate portrayal of a schizophrenic. And how would that inform his performance? But then you see somebody like Jeffrey Combs performing, and his Poe performance on stage, he goes a complete different direction. So everybody finds their different ways, and there's even people who try to do scientific analysis of the story. We had a forensic entomologist here who now's the head of the Virginia Museum of Natural Sciences, and he tried to determine, well, what would it take to dismember the body? We know how long the story gives the murderer to commit the crime. He's only got from midnight till 4 a.m. 4 a.m. is when the police show up. And he spent 2 hours of that basically just standing around waiting before he ever kills a guy. So he tried to determine, well, this is somebody probably has experience as a butcher. So he tried to figure out, well, who this person would have been based on the few clues we get from the story. But he's definitely somebody who can work a hatchet and meat cleaver and really get this done. Somebody who's accustomed to, cleaning up maybe pork or, big piece of meat, and he's able to dismember this body that quickly because he doesn't have a whole lot of time.
Yeah.
And he does it without leaving a single speck of blood on the floor.
Oh, I know. And what makes me think of that with what you were saying about the forensics person is like Mythbusters. I mean, obviously you can't do that in real life, but it makes me think
I guess
of that
that's
TV
not
show.
allowed.
Yeah, I mean, unless you are trained in the anatomical and trained how to, dismember with the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, the bones. I mean, you'd need a bone saw. You would need, and it would take precision. It would take a lot of time to make sure you get it all, because draining a person of blood can be pretty quickly if you know what and where to cut
Right.
first. I know this is going to sound really gross, and when I'm talking, like, yes, okay, no, I don't dismember bodies, but I'm just saying, I watch a lot of forensic files. I have a background in
Yes.
criminology, so, but yeah, but it just brings out the suspense of someone that I
Yeah.
think of it. If you are pushed to a certain point, I think you can accomplish anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've known you can watch different videos or see different stories of people that do miraculous or just things that are far beyond human capability when they're put in certain situations.
Well,
So,
and adrenaline kicks in
yeah.
as well. Yeah.
it could be a possibility, but you have to err on the side of, this is a fictional story.
Mhm.
So, but it's meant to mess with the psychological.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
which Poe does very well, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because we know this isn't a reliable narrator, so
Right.
Exactly.
we've got to keep in mind that he's not telling us the whole truth because he's not seeing objectively a lot of the times. Like at one point, he says, well, he killed a man because the heartbeat got so loud that he thought the neighbors would hear it through the walls.
Yes.
Yep.
So that's what said the old man's hour had come, and he rushed the room without shrieking.
Yeah.
And we objectively know his heartbeat's probably not going to beat so loudly the neighbors will hear it through the walls. But by that time, we've been inside of that murderer's head for so long, we almost forget that, hey, that doesn't quite add up.
Yeah. And if the narrator has kind of snapped and gone into a fit of madness and rage, his thought process and what he's telling us is definitely going to be even more than unreliable, but just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I love how Poe, you can see the influence that he got from those two particular court cases,
Mm-hmm.
Especially about the one that first brought in the first insanity plea. Because no one from that time period, when you did not fit in with the norm, they would stick you in a sanitarium like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or like Ben Franklin, before he started pushing for the first Philadelphia hospital,
Mm-hmm.
that people would just leave their family, their people that are on the streets who were suffering from mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't even want to think, oh no, they're either possessed by demons,
Yeah.
or they're just evil. So there wasn't a strict diagnosis for mental health.
Right. Yeah.
And so they either hid them away, or they just made them the devil incarnate, basically.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they thought that in post time they were starting to really make serious advances.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to open up mental hospitals across the country.
Yep.
And before that, it seemed like a lot of mental hospitals were just for confinement. They're just restrained. That's where you send the people who aren't quite acting normally, whether they're melancholic or
Hysterical,
sanguine, or they had different diagnoses. You could have mania, monomania, you could have melancholia, which now you might call depression or major depressive disorder. But back then they just had these different diagnoses. And if you were melancholic, your problem could just be you had too much black bile, so they had to make you throw up. Maybe give some mercury pills, you'll throw up. If you're sanguine, if you're nervous, what the problem is, you get too much blood. If they just cut you open, they could drain some blood. Maybe if you don't die, you'll feel better.
Yeah.
And they had different cures they tried, like the heroic cures. One of them was called the spread eagle cure, where they basically strap you to a table, turn you upside down, and pour water on your head. And now I call that waterboarding. But back then, that's what you went to the mental hospital to get. So it might not necessarily make you better.
No.
So Poe's day, they were trying to come up with new cures, like they were trying to expose people to beautiful music, or take them to hospitals or in the countryside. You can get back to nature. The idea that if we can just get out of society's corrupting influence, we can get back in touch with our inner light, and that will cure these mental illnesses.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't. It just depends on what the cause of this was, but they hadn't really figured out the causes. And here's Poe writing these stories where he's fascinated. Like when he did watch that trial of James Wood, not the actor James Woods, but James Wood, who had murdered his whole family. And and he's claiming he's not guilty by reason of insanity. And Poe wrote about this, and he wrote about how people expected this murderer to just be ranting and raving, that's what insanity looks like in the art and literature of the time. That's how we know somebody's insane. But Poe said, no, this guy is remarkably calm and self-possessed in everything he's saying. When he's describing buying the pistols, he's describing slaughtering his family, he's staying perfectly calm. And Poe said in his article, that's what we should be looking out for. That's the true sign that there's something dark lurking in there that we can't quite understand. And Poe was fascinated with the workings of the human mind. And a few of his stories, like The Imp of the Perverse and The Black Cat, he really puts it in the forefront. He describes how there is this voice in our head. It's like our ego just telling us this is what we should do. And that's the voice we want the world to hear, the world to see. But then there's also something he called the imp of the perverse, which is that dark side within us that wants us to do the wrong thing for the wrong thing's sake. Even if it leads to our own destruction, it's pulling us forward. It's that feeling you get when you're at the edge of a cliff. Just step just a little bit closer to the edge, even though you know you're not going to survive that fall, but there's something pulling you. And The Black Cat, he does a great job of describing it and showing how somebody who's a perfectly normal, healthy, happy man who loves his wife and his pets, adores his beautiful black cat, gradually over the course of the story starts to be overwhelmed by something that's leading him to do the wrong thing for the wrong thing's sake, even if it means he's going to hate himself. And one day he plucks out his cat's eyeball with a penknife just because he knows it's an unforgivable crime. And that just really sets off the rest of the story. And it seems in this case to happen when the character is drinking. That's, I guess, unleashes his inhibition and makes him do these horrible things like hanging the cat from the tree or burying an axe in his wife's brain.
Yep.
And Poe's saying there's this possibility that there is this force in all of us, that we can usually keep it repressed, but there's something that we don't quite understand that maybe it's making us do the wrong thing for the wrong thing's sake. It's going to lead to our destruction. And Poe is one of those people who's really trying to figure out how can we understand that. Phrenology, the study of the shapes of people's skulls, that didn't really lead us to any real conclusions. Maybe there's other ways we can arrive at understanding what really makes people tick and where the borderline is between sanity and insanity, between living your normal life and being locked up. It's kind of a death sentence. You're locked up until you act like everybody else. And
and you know, something else to kind of add to what you're saying with the narrator, was he with the old man 24 hours a day, every day, you know, and for how long? And is that what drove him, you know, taking care of him? Was that what drove him to the edge of insanity?
Yeah,
You
because
kinda
the
wonder.
definition, because one of the wonderful definitions of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, but expecting a different outcome.
Right.
So, I mean, we all have the monotony of like certain things that we might do. Some people have jobs that they just go in and they sit in the cubicle and they do their job and they see the same four walls. They see the same thing. There's not really any kind of
Newness.
or different. So we kind of get in this steady plodding along and not really seeing what's around us. So does that narrow it down to where that draws us in to where our minds trying to find a way out of the box that we put our, you know, real life into, and it just breaks. You know, it breaks a hole and we don't know what to do.
That's very true.
So, I mean, and if you go back to the time that he was writing this, the Reformation was going on, and they were looking at prisons, they were looking at the psychiatrics or the, you know, sanitariums, and trying to change it because they saw how humans were being abused because they were using the sanatoriums as their way of experimenting. And even in jails, you know, they were putting children in the same jail cells as adults. Men and women were being put together. So there was no separation. So that could draw in and cause someone to have a mental break, a fugue state. So yeah, I mean, Poe, that's the one thing that I love most about Poe is he causes these questions.
Yes.
He makes you think. Whatever you're reading, he makes you think.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier, I can't remember who we were talking to, but every time we read a Poe story that we've read multiple times, we always find something new to pull out and think about. And that's what we love so much about Poe, is his way of being able to allow the reader to interpret things in so many different ways.
Oh yeah, the Telltale Heart is such a short story. It's
Yeah.
not the shortest of his short stories, but it's a quick read. It's
Yes.
not nearly as long as The Fall of the House of Usher,
Mhm.
but you still keep finding these little gems hidden in there, and
Mhm.
it sends you on a different path, and you keep thinking, well, what is the relationship between the narrator and the old man? Are we supposed to know? Does it matter that we know, or
Right.
should we guess it? I mean, at one point, the murderer says, I walked boldly into his chamber, called him by name. So you think, well, a servant probably wouldn't call him by his first name like that. Is it
Mhm.
a spouse? Is it a child? Is it a son, a daughter? But there are speculations, maybe it is a servant.
Yeah.
We don't know if the killer is a male or a female. It's not really defined in the story. What's their relationship to this old man? But we do know that this murder says they loved the old man. He didn't ever wrong. He never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think it was his eye.
Yeah.
It's this, the pale blue eye, like a vulture's.
Yeah.
So imagine maybe he's seeing this eye every single day, and this his resentment over other things just building. That eye becomes a symbol of that.
Yeah.
And there's also a nice passage after the police show up, and the murderer says, I took him to the old man's chamber, shows his treasures undisturbed. And you think, oh, this is evidence that he didn't kill him for his money. But, well, would you have moved the treasures? I mean, his gold's probably the same place it was. It's not like you had any time to move it. And you live there. So where are you going to take the stuff?
Exactly.
Yeah, just leave it there.
Yeah.
So maybe that opens up the possibility that he's making up the story about being driven mad by the old man's eye. Maybe it's just him trying to trick us.
That's
Could be.
very true.
Or, and this is another thing, that the eye bothers him so bad because it's unnatural.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that are drawn to the symmetricals of people's faces
Mm-hmm.
or the asymmetry of something, and they unconsciously or subconsciously can see that and experience it. So it may just be that the eye is not, it's not natural, it's not there, it's not supposed to be there, and it can just draw on his psyche to the point of where I've got to make it stop, I've got to put a stop to it, I got to make it disappear because it's not natural, it doesn't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
On our YouTube we have Jim, who says that he's loving the analysis, and that Dr. Gaber, I think that says mate, in Canada, gets deeply into the topic from the therapist and the physician's point of view. His current bestseller, The Myth of Normal, points directly at this kind of toxic society. And he goes, I'm sure Dr. Mate might not see the connection, but Poe was ahead of his time in many ways.
Oh, yes.
I
In more ways than one.
Yes, I think
No
so.
comment.
Yeah. I think he brought a lot of attention to a lot of different things in society at that time,
Absolutely.
whether he intended to or not, if it was just one of those things he was trying to sell some work.
Mhm.
Who knows?
Yeah. And
I think he still wanted to sell the work, but he's also examining these issues. And he
Yeah.
lived in the age when criminology is just really getting off the ground. He'd read the memoirs of Vidocq, and that's why his Dupin mysteries are set in Paris, because that's where Vidocq was, the father of criminology. And Poe is learning about crime scene analysis and surveillance and disguise and all these things, and cryptography. And that informed his mysteries. So why shouldn't true crime and the news and his research inspire his horror stories too? These are really well researched horror stories.
absolutely. I wish Poe would have written more of the Dupin stories, because murder mystery fiction is one of my favorites. Love Sherlock Holmes, all of Agatha Christie's works, and just Poe's 3 stories are so good, and it would have been so neat to have read more.
Yeah, maybe if he had another decade, he could have
Yeah.
written some more.
Oh, I know it.
All right. Well, Melanie pointed out that it's pronounced Matei.
Okay.
My apologies. I was unaware of that. And then Jim also says in his story that he subbed to Sarah, he used the eye image and transported to a pentatopicon, prison. Poe's symbols are dynamic and relative to many areas.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's true. I
Yeah.
mean, it's Poe. We've discussed this in Poe Unplugged and in other ways. Poe is just a dynamic of everything. And
Yeah.
he takes the universe and just goes with it.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for, correcting my pronunciation, Melanie.
Yes.
So, and I believe that.
Are we close to time?
Yep, I think we're getting
Yep.
there. We've got a good
Got about
discussion.
5 more minutes.
Yeah, 5 more minutes. So, Chris, is there anything going on at the Poe Museum that you haven't shared that you might want to share to the public? If anybody in that area wants to drop by and see, and we talked about the watch. Now, is it on display? I know it's in the video. It said that it was donated and would be on display in 2022. So I'm assuming it's on display.
Oh yeah, it's on display with Poe's pocket knife. We actually have Poe's penknife that came from a different collector. And sometime in 1848, 1849, Poe gave the pocket knife in exchange for a loan to Annie Richmond's cousin, and it stayed in that family until it came here. So it's great to have these pieces, and both of them have Poe's name on them. He, to spend 50 cents or $1 more and have his name engraved on it. So the little penknife has E.A. Poe engraved on the side. It's one of those great little treasures that comes up that have just been in a private collection all these years, and nobody really knew about it. And now everybody can come see it and learn more about it. And we're gradually putting our collections online. We have an online collections database at poemuseum.org, so you can see photos of some of these pieces, read through the manuscripts yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been scanning hundreds of letters and manuscripts. So it's a great treasure trove for do a little Poe research when you have the time.
Yeah, and we do a lot, and we use your website a ton. And
yes, thank you
for so much. And I make a small donation each month as a Poe patron, and we appreciate you guys so much and learn so much from what you have on the website. But the Curator's Crypt, we could not do what we do without you, honestly.
Thanks.
Yes.
That's why we're here.
Yes.
Thank you.
What the one question I had, because I think we've got just a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Poe story or poem?
Gosh, I keep thinking either Never Bet the Devil Your Head or The Cask of Amontillado.
Okay.
What I love about Never Bet the Devil Your Head is it's funny. And he's ripping on the transcendentalist.
Yes.
Remember Emerson said, oh, he's just that old jingle man. But here is Poe just trash talking the transcendentalist and complaining that his stories didn't have a moral to them. So he's got a story with a moral. So if you like some smack talk from some Poe and some good Poe humor, it almost reads in a folksy sort of way, like Mark Twain sort of thing. Except this was written when Mark Twain would have still been a kid.
Yeah.
So it's a fun story, but then also The Cask of Amontillado, you can't beat that with the foreshadowing and the irony. I love the line where the victim, his name is Fortunato, and he's the most unfortunate guy in the whole story.
Exactly.
He's coughing, and the murderer says, oh, your health is precious. Turn back. I cannot take it. And Fortunato says, oh, 'tis nothing. I shall not die of a cough. The murderer says, true.
Yes.
Yeah, the Cask of Amontillado is in my top 5 favorites, and we just did Never Bet the Devil Your Head on our Poe Unplugged in the end of September. And so our group, we call it our Unbook Club. We put out at the beginning of the month what we're reading, and then we join on Zoom and talk about it, and then we put the audio and the video out on our podcasting and YouTube. And so we have some great conversations, but yeah, that's
Yes.
a great story. It definitely is. I think we are about out of time. And so, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. And I think you've added a ton about the Telltale Heart and just about the Poem Museum and everything. And we appreciate you so much.
Well, thanks for having me, and have a melancholy evening.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
We will do our very best. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Have a great night. Thank you again.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Never more.
Exactly.